All right, good afternoon. I'm Daryl Garner, and today I'll be talking about equity and funding in public schools. And this is for the educational leadership. Today I'm going to cover three main articles from Education Week that I reviewed, and they're mainly dealing with equity. And then as we move on to the third one, it'll talk about funding effects on equity. And then I'll finish up with some leadership challenges and then classroom application issues since I'm a secondary school teacher, business teacher at Campus High School. I'll relate it to my classroom as best I can. All right, to start off today, thought this quote was fitting from Mary Catherine Swanson. She is the AVID founder, that is Advancement via Individual Determination founder, and it says the perpetuation of democracy and long-term economic success of the nation in the 21st century hinge on building an education system to accommodate and prepare all of our children. AVID focuses on getting some of those underprivileged kids, taking them. Parents might not have went to college, teaching them study skills and education skills that they need to be successful in college and in life in general. So the first article I looked at was "A Nation Falls Far Short on Educational Equity." This is a data-heavy article, just talking about a lot of recent data that was accumulated via the civil rights data that they've collected for several years. But this is the most recent collection, and they found that minorities are a lot of times taught by inexperienced teachers. About 20% of schools with the highest proportion of minorities have about 20% of their teachers are not fully qualified or do not have all the certifications that their state requires. Also, there's a lack of Algebra 2 and chemistry classes, which severely affects the STEM education in those places. Also, the last two down here regard black students. The first one says about 16% of enrollment is taken by black students, although that is the case, almost 33% of the suspended students in schools are black students, so it's a higher proportion. And black children make up about 18% of school enrollment, and almost half of suspensions in preschool are black children. So that's some of the most recent data found, and this article talks about. It also highlights some new data that they're going to collect, started in 2015 and 2016, including the number of violent and serious crime incidences. Schools will have to report this data. Number of missed school days by suspended. This is in regards to suspending children and especially for non-violent things, and trying to determine whether that affects performance in school. And then the last one, or last little piece of data, is the number of allegations of harassment and bullying towards sexual orientation and religion. That'll add to the data collection in 2015 and 2016. Additionally, they thought that it would be important to include the school district's teacher salaries and non-personnel expenditures so that they can try to determine if a school district is on track or not regarding those. But the article also talks about discipline and how minority students seems to be have a higher rate of misbehavior. Now that's either because they are actually misbehaving or that they're targeted at a higher rate. And this article tends towards the latter, that they are actually targeted more due to their minority status. The U.S. Department of Education also urges nonviolent zero tolerance policy changes, and that is where, for example, clothing or whatnot, where they might suspend a kid. The Department of Education is actually urging against that because it actually pulls the kid out of school, and then that's affecting some of the scores and total education for that child. The second part, the teachers. Minorities are taught by underqualified, novice, and lower paid teachers. I discussed some of the underqualified teaching stuff from earlier. Approximately 20% of the teachers in the highest minority school districts do not have all their certifications. Also, it's well documented that minority school districts typically pay their their teachers far less than other school districts. And then we discussed earlier the no algebra 2 and no chemistry. approximately a quarter of the schools minority schools have no Algebra 2, and a third of them have no chemistry. So that really affects STEM education. The second article kind of moves from statistics to some of the challenges that this author thinks, and then he offers up 3 suggestions to move forward as far as determining the equity and trying to get schools more equity. The challenges, the article, this is For Each and Every Child report in 2013, says those who attend schools in high poverty neighborhoods are getting an education that is more closely approximates schools in developing nations. So essentially, the wealthy, more well-off children are getting a better education. The lower, high poverty neighborhoods are getting far worse education. And this article really talks about that. It talks about how money is not going to solve the problem. That will link up with my last article, which talks about money and how it actually does solve the problem. So these two articles actually contrast, but this one says money will not solve the problem, and the government solution is a part of the problem too, because it includes teachers and administrators in figuring equity of their schools. It actually recommends somebody from the outside. He outlines 3 steps for the solutions. The first step is the assessment should not include anybody, teachers or administrators from the district in figuring out equity. It should actually come from someone from the outside, which to me makes a lot of sense. Most of the time we're biased inside our own school districts, and we want to look successful even if we might not be. The second step, states provide feedback on programs and strategies. They already do this, but he recommends more feedback on programs and strategies in order to make schools more equitable. And then the third step is once they if they ever achieve equity, to maintain that, they need to continue to analyze findings and learning approaches and objectives, really getting into that collaboration piece so that other school districts can kind of feed off of the equity that their school district is getting. And then the final article I looked at was equity is the key to better school funding. And this one is, in contrast to the last article, it actually discusses how funding has had a positive effect on school districts. The Advanced Illinois Study is where the basis for this article, again, it comes from Education Week, but essentially the Advanced Illinois Study investigated 50 states and their K through 12 funding. It established relationships with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a standardized testing. They mainly focus on 4th grade reading and 8th grade math from the years 2003 to 2011. What they determined was state spending per pupil actually does matter. Like I said, that's in contrast to the previous article. And then how they spend also matters. So how the state is actually spending the money. Are they putting it towards the districts that have maybe more influence in their capital, or are they trying to make a difference in kids' lives? So they really broke it into 3 things: the level of spending, and like I said before, they actually determined in those years, those 8 years, that there is a per pupil spending and 4th grade reading score correlation. For about every $1,000 per pupil more they spend, they actually increase rating scores slightly. And then they got into the source of state funding, of course, or source of school funding, federal, state, and local. And they found that state funding, if there's more state funding, typically those states have more equitable school systems because they're able to distribute the money more. If a state is heavily local spending, like property tax, then it tends to stay local and less of that money is shared to the districts who actually need it more than the more expensive schools. And then finally, equity. The states that provide more equity have better test scores, according to their study, and more needs to be spent on higher poverty districts than the low poverty districts. And that kind of leans back towards the sourcing, local districts, spending money locally. Now, how does that all affect me? I'm an educator, not an administrator or anything like that, but it definitely poses some leadership challenges. From a classroom perspective, we need to ensure success of all students, equip and enable all of them, regardless of their status or their poverty level. If they come to class, they need to be educated. From a school perspective, we need to ensure that the money that we get for local and state is actually spent effectively and works towards those kids in poverty more effectively. And then we need to look at potential outside sources for an equity measure. The second article talked about that, not looking at ourselves for equity, but actually discussing it with other, or bringing in outside sources to look at equity and see if we're measuring up effectively versus other people in the state or even the nation. From more of a classroom application, for me, nothing really changes. I focus heavily on my core values, and we talked about core values in the educational leadership class and really developed them and strengthened them. But integrity, hard work, team, optimism, and empathy are my big 5 core values that I stick to, and I think that really helps with equity in my classroom. Integrity, I'm always trying to do the right thing, trying to help every kid out. Hard work, all the kids are required to do hard work and work hard. Team, this really brings together everybody in an atmosphere towards success. And then optimism, staying positive. A lot of those higher poverty children might tend to be more pessimistic, but I preach optimism. And then empathy, especially for me, growing up, definitely not in a low or high poverty situation growing up. I need to have empathy and kind of understand where some of these kids are coming from and the lifestyles they have at home, which can definitely influence their work. And then I put AVID down here. I'm going to be an AVID teacher next year, so AVID, strong on engaging underprivileged students. I'll have a classroom full of them. I'm really excited about working with these kids to try to get them to college, which is their goal, and I'll have them from their freshman year to their senior year. So I'm looking forward to that. And then teach learning skills needed to be successful in school and life, and just really foster a love of learning, which is what they need to be successful. So today we talked about those 3 articles. Some of them were contrasting challenges and suggestions. Some of them thought that more money should be spent. Others said that it doesn't really matter. But I discussed some leadership challenges and then how I'm going to apply that actually in the classroom, followed by my sources.